So now you can turn the crankshaft to see if it works good. And it does. I'm just going to put a bit more oil on the rod here. Now we're ready to put the sump cover back on, but before I do that, I'm going to clean all the edges of the crankcase with a fine emery cloth paper, a grit of 400 or 600, all the way around till it's nice and smooth. And wipe it off really good. The next thing I'm going to use is some RTV black silicone, and I'm going to put a layer all the way around the crankcase and on the side of the sump cover. So I've got it coated with that RTV silicone all around, and also a small layer on the sump cover. I'm reusing the same gasket because it was in excellent condition. Now before you insert your cover, make sure that your governor gear here isn't broken, that it's working fine like that. And if there's any shavings, make sure you've cleaned all that out of there. Before we put the cover back on, we've got to put in the valve lifters and the camshaft in. I had marked my valve lifters when I took them off as intake and exhaust. This is the intake, and the intake would be the first hole here. So down here is the exhaust valve lifter you'd put in, and this one here will be the intake. Now you'll notice on the crankshaft gear there's going to be a little dot here. This dot here has to match up with the dot on the camshaft. So I'm going to turn the crankshaft a bit forward and line up the little dot here to where the camshaft is going to go. So now you can put a bit of oil on your camshaft just to make things a bit smoother. And now we're going to insert the camshaft, and you have to line up the notch here on the camshaft to the little notch on the gear of the crankshaft. It may take a few attempts to do this, but you have to make sure you get it right. Once you've got it in, you may have to move it tooth by tooth. If you're having a hard time lining it up properly, move the crankshaft. You can always lift up the cam a bit and move the crankshaft to line it up. This is how you want it. The notches are matching perfectly. So now we're ready to put the sump cover back on. You may have to tap the sump cover lightly with a rubber mallet to get it in all the way down. And now we're ready to put in the sump cover bolts. Make sure that the longer sump cover bolt, which there's only one I believe, goes on this bolt here under the governor. Just tighten them up evenly for now, and then we're going to torque it with the torque wrench. So I'm going to torque the bolts here at 125 pounds. You blow a connecting rod, the keyway here is going to snap, and this is what happened. I have removed it. Now the new number for the keyway, the part number, is 32589, and this is what it's going to look like. So you just want to insert the keyway into the groove like this. I'm just going to lightly tap it in. Make sure that it's not up too far here, that it's level inside. Next we're going to install the flywheel, and you want to line up the keyway hole here with the keyway you've put on the crankshaft. And wiggle it in, and once it's in right, the shaft's going to turn with the flywheel. And you can look inside here to see the keyway that it is properly lined up, and it is. So now I'm going to put the rest of the stuff back on. Now the starter cup goes on here. And you've got a large lock washer and the nut. I believe the manual says 400 pounds of torque to torque this nut. So you want to make sure it's really tight. So now is a good time to turn your engine to make sure nothing's jamming up and it's turning nice and smooth. So we're going to insert the governor control arm. You want to insert the arm from the carburetor to the external hole on the rod. Next, I'm going to install the governor arm just by inserting it back into its groove. Also, at this point, before you put the shroud on, it's a good time to replace the fuel line, which I did on this engine. Next, we're going to insert the shroud and the linkage back in hole, second from the top on the left here. Make sure you don't forget the primer line. It's going to come out of the shroud right here, and it gets hooked up over here on the carburetor. Now what you want to do is line up the holes here and there, and also the hole down here. And this bracket's going to go like this. And there's also another bolt that goes over here. The guy that owns this motor has the cover that goes here, so I'm not going to be putting it on. And the last thing to put on is your fuel tank. And don't forget to hook up your fuel tank. So I'm going to put a new plug on this engine, and it's a number RJ19LM Champion or NGK V6S. And I'm going to gap it at 30. And the most important thing, do not forget to add in your oil. And the oil level's good. So this is all you have to do to replace your connecting rod, and I'm sure everybody watching this video can do it. Now I'm going to put gas in this engine and give it a quick test run. The motor, it's outside, and this will actually be the first test run with it, with the new connecting rod in it. Well, there she goes. Good now. I'm sure the guy's going to be happy with that. He wasn't sure if the motor was going to be scrapped or not. But as long as your block isn't cracked, there's always hope for them.